everyone, and welcome to Living One. My name is Olivia, and I'm so glad to welcome all of you today. For those of you who don't know, Living One is Krulos's monthly webinar series, now in its 6th year. With guest speakers from around the world, we listen in to how people are bringing their ethics, minds, and lives into alignment with nature for earth and animal liberation and revitalization. Today, we have a very special session of Living One before we begin our next series, A Re-Enchanted World, on August 22nd. Today, we will be joined by David Morris, who is going to speak with us about 10,000 Central Parks as a model for radical hope. David B. Morris is a writer-scholar. The Culture of Pain won a Penn Prize, initiating a trilogy with Illness and Culture in the Postmodern Age and Eros and Illness. He has held a Guggenheim Fellowship, co-founded with the Taos Writing Retreat for Health Professionals, and maintains an international reputation in pain medicine. His narrative nonfiction includes Earth Warrior, recounting an anti-driftnet campaign with environmental activist Paul Watson, Civil War Duet, a dialogue with his great-grandfather who fought with the 101st Ohio Infantry, and Wanderers, literature, culture, and the open road. His most recent book, coming soon, is 10,000 Central Parks, a climate change parable. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various Indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Krulo Center for Nonviolence is located on the homelands of the grizzly bear, takelma, daku betete, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. Finally, we ask that all of us participate with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to foster. So without further ado, we welcome Izzy Clark and David Morris.
Thank you very much, Olivia, and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for being here. And David, I know you've got a presentation for us, so if you wanted to start out with that, that would be wonderful. So if you just wanted to share your screen and perfect, start it up.
All right. Thank you very much, Olivia. Isabel, I'm delighted to be here and delighted with the background of the Carolus Center. It occurred to me that there's a perspective I hadn't thought about when I was writing the book, and it's entirely appropriate to this occasion. So I wanted to add the term at the top of this copy of the book coming out, the term that we all know, structural violence. But I wondered if there's an equal facility for using the term structural nonviolence. That is, as I began thinking about the park, I began thinking that for me, as an extremely peaceful place. And I would walk Central Park often 4 or 5 miles a day. And I would walk there in complete peace and a calmness of mind. And I realize now was an absolute contrast to how I normally moved around New York City, with an edge, constantly on the alert for pickpockets or muggers or whatever violence was going to come streaming out of the city at me. The park oddly had the quality of a sanctuary. And I think in thinking about nonviolence, it may be that we should be also thinking about parks at the same time. And that will be part of what I want to talk about today. And I think we can't exclude from those two subjects the question of climate change. Because there is a violence that comes from climate change that is indeed structural, that is built in now to the structure of the global climate. And that structure, many scientists believe, has been affected by human actions. So there are structures of violence that have been created, and what I would want to emphasize that it's equally possible, not necessarily easy, but possible to create structural nonviolence. And that's one of the things we might be looking to do. So a few quick facts about Central Park that make it, for me, not just a local or a New York issue, but in fact, a global icon and a place we need to think about. 843 acres in what is now the heart of downtown Manhattan, 2.5 miles long, a half-mile wide, an incredible rectangle that you can actually see on satellite from space. It was completed between 1858 and 1876. Dates don't generally matter to me, but in this case they do, because it was created in the period immediately before, during, and after the American Civil War. So it's quite clear that in the US, we live in an atmosphere of division and conflicting views. Central Park emerged in an even more divided period. And so I think it's, in terms of a parable, it offers a sense of what we can do if we want to build structures of nonviolence, even amid violence itself. Of interest to me because of the anti-immigrant rhetoric in the US today, that it was constructed almost entirely by immigrants working for $1 a day, usually Irish and German immigrants. Today, it gets some 42 million visits a year, which I just discovered is about the same as the city of Las Vegas. Manages to do all that without a single slot machine. And finally, in terms of the global environment, the UN says that today 55% of the world population lives in urban areas. The figure is projected to go up to at least 68%. And that being the case, and urban environments beginning to look a lot like the surroundings of Central Park, it means that it is more and more important, I think, to look at the contribution that parks can make to the quality of life. So I call my book a climate change parable, and I'm contrasting that with the kind terms fable and history. A fable like the tortoise and the hare has a perfectly exportable meaning. Slow and steady wins the race, but not much more. You don't learn much about the tortoise, and you don't learn much more about the hare. And the history, so the fable is kind of reductive. History is all-inclusive and never ends. We're always learning more about the Civil War or about ancient Egypt. And I like the term parable because of its connection with the geometry of the parabola, which is defined as a U-shaped curve, and in fact has a mathematical formula. And so what I do in the book, in one sense, is to talk about an origin story of Central Park and to connect that somehow with the current crisis of climate change. So I'm not doing history, I'm not doing fable, I'm not sure what you would call what I'm doing. Kafka, who had an interest in parables, said that they traffic in the ungraspable. And I like that term considerably. So let me turn to the ungraspable Central Park and suggest what I'm going to do today. I'd like to start with an extended origin story, do a section of before and after, and then end talking briefly about health, climate, and nonviolence. And my aim will be to end about 1:35 so that we can all go home and celebrate if need be. So the sort of patron saint of Central Park, if there is one, would be Frederick Law Olmsted. And here's a sort of canonical portrait of him as a 70-year-old patriarch of American landscape design. But I find what he said about parks fascinating. The purpose of an urban park is to provide an escape from buildings. The buildings are clear enough, and he was prescient in seeing what was going to happen in New York City. But the notion that the park is an escape strikes me as exactly right. And it suggests to what extent the surrounding life is defined in terms of confinement. We're confined to works as well as to buildings. And the park offers us, in some ways, a way out. I don't really like the notion of heroes and villains, so I'm trying in some ways to undercut that, but in some ways you have to have the notion to undercut it. But what Olmsted looked like at 70 is not exactly what he looked like at 35 when he was creating Central Park. And in fact, he had no idea about becoming a landscape architect. He said, I should have had nothing to do with the design of Central Park or Prospect Park had not Vaux, that's Calvin Vaux, invited me to join him in those works. But for his invitation, I should not have been a landscape architect. I should have been a farmer. Interesting that he chooses farming. His father was a wealthy dry goods owner in Hartford, Connecticut, who bought him 2 farms, and he saw himself as a scientific farmer, not a subsistence farmer. But he also had a neighbor on Long Island named George Putnam, who came with him at one point with the idea that Putnam wanted to create something that he thought the American marketplace was ready for, and that was paperback books. Did Olmsted have anything that he might give him? So it brings up for me the principle of the opportunism or action at the right moment. And in fact, the classical world had this figure they called Kairos. It was the youngest divine son of Zeus. And you can see Kairos has a long forelock in front. The back of his head is bald. It's got wings on his feet and on his shoulders. The notion is that you only get one chance to take your shot, or the opportunity passes you. That it can seem that that's simply luck, but for the ancient world, there are 2 metaphors for Kairos, or opportunity, was archery and weaving. The archer lets the bow release the arrow, partly out of skill and partly out of intuition, not really out of luck. And the weaver absolutely can't rely on luck. There's a speed and a timing involved with sending the shuttle. So what happens with Olmsted and Calvert Vaux is that they come together at exactly the right moment, and that they understand in some ways that collaboration is essential. In fact, it is Vaux who asks Olmsted to collaborate on a design for Central Park. So they, in fact, proceed together and win the competition that Vaux has designed for the creation of the new Central Park. There are villains in the story, however, even if we undercut them as villains. But let's know that they're always there. They're always opposition. Egbert Ville was a military man who was hired as the chief engineer in the creating of the grounds that would become Central Park. And so when Olmsted first comes to work at Central Park, he comes to work as the park superintendent, and Egbert Ludovicius Ville is his boss. Ville is a very practical man, and he looks at Olmsted, who comes from a pretty genteel Connecticut background, as an unpractical man. Nothing could rankle Olmsted more. It sat with him his entire life. Late in his in his life, he creates what is an unpublished memoir of an unpractical man. He saw himself, as he said, as a hard worker and a doer, not as a park maker. And Andrew Haswell Green was one of the original members of the Board of Commissioners who oversaw the work that went forth on Central Park. He soon has himself appointed as the board controller, and he and Olmsted began a long-running battle over every expenditure of the park. So there's, if we want to create structural nonviolence, we're going to have opponents there. Let me move now to a sort of before and after look of what they were doing, because the land in some ways was also an opponent here. This is a look from 1855 at some of the steep gullies that were part of Central Park. The land was available in one sense because it was too irregular to be graded for streets. It was also settled. There were people living there. Some 1,600 people were living there, some of them obviously not owning the land. There were some 450 landowners who needed to be identified and compensated for their land. But it was an extremely unpromising location. It was full of bogs. Olmsted describes being taken through bogs in which he sank up to his knees. They're part of the inhabitants of the park were Irish pig owners. Their places were called piggeries. And so there was, as you can imagine, it was not an inviting location. There were German settlers there who might, over the summer, create vegetable gardens. There was even, in fact, a settled, largely African-American community called Seneca Village, which was eradicated in the creation of Central Park. So it's important to recognize not only what was gained, but the cost, to recognize what was lost. And in some ways, these losses will be irrevocable. But in that case, they need to be remembered and they need to be honored. One of the things that Vox did as a trained architect was also engage in watercolors. He liked to hang out with artists, especially members of the so-called Hudson River School. He married the sister of artist James McEntee. And so part of the presentation for the Greensward plan, which I'll mention in a minute, involved getting McEntee to do this. This is the most unpicturesque drawing or image in the entire McEntee canon. He's wonderful at giving us images of woods and trees and rocks. And this is just, from his point of view, barrenness. It's the opposite of the picturesque. What Olmsted and Vox do in 1857, 1850 is to get together and to create what they called the Greensward Plan. Now, Olmsted has been writing books about slavery in the South for the past 6 years. He's a very fine writer. It seems to be a stroke of genius that he actually named this plan, the Greensward Plan. I looked up greensward. It means really meadow. And this is not a plan about meadows. It's combines woods and woodland, but he gave it a catchy name. And the Greensward plan has a kind of romantic Scott aura to it. And one of the things I think most interesting about it is when you take the problem of a long rectangle, is how you're going to structure the changes. One of the requirements was for four transverse roads. What made the Greensward plan unique is it was the only plan that suggests sinking the transverse roads below the sight line. So today, if you travel from the east side to the west side, you're traveling through one of the four transverse sunken roads that Olmsted and Vox came up with to solve that particular plan. The other thing that interests me is putting this is the mall. It is at circled at an oblique angle to the rest of the park, and it's aimed at the highest feature visible there, where there was a tower that would tell the park goers when it was safe to ice skate on the park. It is very much an effort in what was known then as the picturesque style that emphasized, as opposed to the symmetries of neoclassicism, variety and irregularity. And that's very much the style that Olmsted and Vox have in mind. Interestingly, they had to work with an existing reservoir known as the Old Reservoir, the almost rectangular or square lower reservoir. And then the Greensward plan called for the creation of a new reservoir. This will have some importance later as we get to the importance of water in New York City. Again, Olmsted had a particular point of view here. The reservoirs in the museum are not part of the park. They are deductions from it. And from Olmsted's point of view, that would also apply to the Metropolitan Museum. This is how the work was done by an immigrant population with horses, carts. There's something like 5 million cubic yards of stone, earth, the topsoil. They created 58 miles of paths, some 36 bridges. Here's what it would look like in a drawing from 1860. Again, you see the mall, oblique angle in the center, and Olmsted and Vox went to elaborate measures to keep the carriages, the equestrians, and the pedestrians from running into each other. And at the very end, in purple, there's a terrace to be crowned with a fountain, which came to be called later Bethesda Terrace. Interestingly, the starting point was maybe Olmsted's visit to Liverpool in 1850, where he encountered Birkenhead Park in the UK, which was supposedly the first park created with public subscriptions, called the People's Park. And as soon as Central Park began to be opened in 1858, ice skating turned into be the rage. Thousands, some estimates are 10,000 people turned out to ice skate. You could rent ice skates. The New York Herald Tribune saw social significance in it. Masters Richard and William from Fifth Avenue in their furs, and plain Dick and Bill from the avenues near the rivers, with bunting flying from joints and middle seams, were all mingled in joyful unity. So there's a socio-political significance to the park. There's also this a civic significance that the local civic leaders argue that the park has been achieved because the industrious population of New York has been wise enough to acquire it and rich enough to pay for it. So the park, from some point of view, was a tribute to the emergence of New York as an international city. But it also has, I think, a much wider significance, and Fox was perceptive about it. He argued to Olmsted that Central Park was the big artwork of the Republic, that it stood in some ways for all the values that American democracy was identified with at that particular time. You notice that there is an equestrian here going on his own path. And it's clear, at least from Vox's point of view, and emphasized here by this Currier and Ives poster, is that the park itself was seen as a work of art. This is a piece of picturesque art with Bow Bridge in the background and the moon providing a benediction. There, in fact, is what the Bow Bridge looked like in Olmsted's day, with the plantings just started. This is what it looks like today, as a gorgeous contribution, and in some ways melded into the changes of the season. And I introduced Christo and Jean-Claude's The Gates here, particularly to emphasize the sort of way in which Central Park has continued to change and continued to kind of embrace its own temporality. Christo refused to give any grand explanation of what the Gates was all about, but it was important to him that it was going to disappear, that it only had less than 2 weeks to exist, even though it took 20 years to create. You can say to your grandson, "I saw that once, but never again." Well, the park for Olmsted is intended to furnish healthful recreation for the poor and the rich, the young and the old, the vicious and the virtuous. I'm struck by that Olmsted is even opening his arms to those who are given over to vice, so far as each can partake therein without infringing upon the rights of others. That is, it's a place that also includes rights and structural nonviolence. It seems to me, is going to have to be built upon an understanding and acceptance of this complex social issue of rights. Also, that the escape from buildings is not just an escape from something, but an escape into something. And it's an escape into an area of rights, equality, and recreation and health. The benefits of urban parks are just becoming reasonably well known. They modify the heat island effect, they provide exercise, reduce healthcare costs, filter the rain, reduce runoff, protect drinking water, reduce crime, create jobs, spur local investment, support equity and nonviolence, and promote peace and nonviolence. And here, an area I wish I could make the subject of an entire lecture, but the Peace Parks Foundation was begun by Nelson Mandela, among others. It provides a structure, it seems to me, for heading off violence among, especially on countries that border each other. And it creates a series of identifiable sanctuaries, not just for individuals, but obviously for wildlife as well. So if Central Park has plenty of wildlife, although it's not usually the kind of wildlife we celebrate, but the Peace Parks Foundation suggests other options as well. So I think we need to think of parks not as necessarily cookie cutter versions of Central Park, but rather Central Park as a kind of metaphor for parks and what they can do. and for their possibility of creating a kind of structural nonviolence. Bethesda Terrace in 1873 received the long-awaited fountain. It was created by Emma Stebbins, who was the first woman chosen, commissioned to create a public artwork in New York City. And the angel of the waters is a figure from the New Testament, referring to a pool in Jerusalem that had supposedly been stirred by an angel and was used for healing. So the water here is very much connected with healing. In 1837, there'd been a terrible cholera epidemic in New York. That was the reason why the old reservoir had been created in 1842. Cholera epidemics continued. Olmsted lost an infant to a cholera, and the new reservoir was, in one sense, water being imported into New York City, less for recreation than for simple matters of health. And the UN is very clear in stating that climate change is primarily a water crisis. It involves floods, it involves hurricanes, it involves sea level rise, and it involves the contamination of drinking water for people across the globe. This is the point at which I was going to end, and I had the idea that I would end with applause. That was kind of a bet that I wouldn't do that.
Wonderful, thank you. I wondered, you mentioned that the Peace Park idea, you would like to, it's an aspect of this that, of course, with the non-violent side of it, is particularly relevant to Kerelos. And so I wondered if there was a little bit more that you could tell us about Peace Parks and what they are designed to do and how effective they are.
Well, I wish I were the authority on the Peace Park Foundation, but I'm not. So I got a very big website, and I would recommend that everybody take a look at that rather than listen to me on the subject. But what's important to me is that Mandela, who I see as a kind of hero of nonviolence in South Africa, was also behind this notion that the parks could be used to defuse the violence that happened among nations in South and Central Africa. And then I think when you add to that the economic value of these parks in allowing the possibility for ecotourism. They offer jobs to the local inhabitants to care for the area. It begins to seem like a kind of such a win-win situation that the question is, why aren't there more of them? When I get most depressed watching what's happening in Ukraine, it just seems to me there are areas there where you need some peace parks. When you look at the terrible destruction in Gaza, whatever rebuilding has to happen there has to happen with parks. I'm very much in my own thinking a biocentrist, not an anthropocentrist. And yet, people are here on the planet. We got to deal with them. We got to live with them. We got to make them a resource and not a problem. And in fact, the way in which it was immigrants who built Central Park suggests that, in fact, low-tech solutions that put people to work can make a genuine contribution to quality of life. Late in his life, Central Park became the center of controversy about changing styles in landscape design. And Olmsted has an interesting passage about it. And he says, finally, it doesn't matter whether it's this style or that style, but whether it contributes to, and this was his phrase, the fullness of life. Now, he doesn't define the fullness of life. I guess each of us might define it a little differently, but we probably know what its opposite is. Its opposite is people who don't get a chance to live any kind of life that they deserve. So I would see both the Peace Park Foundation and Central Park and the pocket parks that are developed around the globe as aspects that contribute to the fullness of life. And in so doing, I think they also contribute to the modification of the worst effects of climate change. Parks aren't going to cure climate change. We have got to be straight about that. But the fact is, no single thing is going to change, have reverse climate change. It's going to be a combination of many things. It's going to take many different collaborations, it seems to me. And I would just like to see parks be part of the conversation, that as the world is exploring possibilities of re-enchantment, that we don't neglect the parks. Central Park, I lived in New York. I was born in New York City. I've lived in New York City. To me, it's unlivable, unthinkable without Central Park. I would love to see, in fact, that possibility open to as many people around the world as possible. And it's a simple monosyllabic solution: a park. Let's make a park.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer, and it brings forward so many things in my mind. One thing, the little pocket parks that I know of, they have a very strong sense of community. You get sort of community volunteers looking after it, and local school children coming in and becoming familiar with trees and with plants and with birds, and they build little bird boxes and put them up on the trees, and then they can visit to see if anyone's flying in and out. And so that aspect of parks, and in London, London it has some wonderful parks in it, and like you, I think that London would be unlivable if it weren't for the green spaces. And fortunately, there are quite a lot of green spaces. They certainly do make a real difference to the quality of life, both in smaller towns and in large cities. And what you mentioned about climate change and also biodiversity. I know in New York, particularly in Central Park, there has been, virtual speciation between different little mice who can't cross roads, white-footed mice. So you have this support for the non-human world in a city environment, which can be very unfriendly. Did you write particularly about the the plants, the trees, and the wildlife in the park, or what do you think about that?
Well, I discovered that Central Park is now a regular stop on what's called the Atlantic Flyway. As birds migrate from South America to Canada, and in reverse from Canada to South America, they stop over in Central Park. And occasionally there's an odd wanderer who comes there as well and causes a great commotion. So I have a piece on a snowy white owl who comes to New York City, has a very lost look about her. It's a young female snowy white owl. But yes, Central Park is important for for the wildlife that is there, for the wildlife that it supports. I have never seen a turtle digging a nest to lay eggs until I came to Central Park. And there by one of the bodies of water, a turtle crawled out and was busily scraping the earth to create a nest. So there is oddly a lot of wildlife there. There are also plenty of squirrels and rats, and then I think there are probably more dogs in Central Park than there are people. But that's okay. We're companion species, which we seem to need each other at this point. And so the park is a place where it almost seems like the dogs take their humans for a walk.
When you look at the nonviolent side of it, and you said the way that you feel yourself easing as you walk into the into a treed place, I'm reminded of the line of Andrew Marvell, a green thought in a green shade, and I don't think any green thoughts can be anything other than peaceful. Is that matched by, I mean, do you think that's a sort of regular feeling, and is it matched by, for example, boringly, crime statistics? I mean, are parks safe?
Thank you. I should say that in the 1970s, there were some horrific assaults in Central Park. It was not a safe place to be. You were told never to go near Central Park after dark. It was just dangerous. My son-in-law, slightly further uptown, was working on his dissertation and commiserating in a local park with a local drug dealer. Lots of things went on in Central Park in the 70s that needed to change. So this is where structural nonviolence, it seems to me, is an important concept. It was in 1980 that the Central Park Conservancy was created as an organization that partnered with the city of New York City to take control of Central Park. So New York City puts up a certain amount of budget, and the Central Park Conservancy has a vast reach of money-raising activities, and they're now very well funded, and they handle a great deal of the daily caretaking of the park and the things that simply slip out of the municipal perspective. So when you put those two together, you get a new structure. And it was a structure that wasn't created for the purpose of nonviolence. I suppose you could have decided to, have a cop every 30 feet, and that would be a different kind of structure. But this partnership, this public-private partnership of people who were mutually invested in the quality of life of the city changed entirely. So everything good about New York City that I've mentioned pretty much happens after, in the modern world, happens after 1980. There's a period from, say, 1870 to 1970 when things were not nearly as good in Central Park.
Thank you.
I would love to see the notion of structural nonviolence explored in the way of what kinds of structures can we build? And I think this public-private partnership is exactly one of them. And I also think extracting sort of two principles from the parable I'm writing. Think big. If Central Park is nothing if not big thinking. And collaborate. Units aren't going to do it. It's going to take Olmsted and Vox together. It's going to take the Central Park Conservancy in the city of New York. There's got to be active collaboration to make it work.
Thank you, and I will let people ask some questions very shortly, but I do have to ask you about Sea Shepherds. For those of you who aren't familiar, Captain Paul Watson was one of the founder members of Greenpeace, and he came to the view that Greenpeace wasn't quite active enough or proactive enough. So he decided to found Sea Shepherd, and they have these wonderful ships that look like pirate ships, and they sail the open seas, protecting sea mammals and fish as well, in a very proactive fashion. They're not violent, but they certainly are active in the way that they protect sea creatures. And you wrote a book about Paul Watson, and so I just wondered, David, if you would share a little bit with us about what led you to want to write that book, and I believe you went on a mission with them, so it would be amazing to hear about it.
Well, I was the only thing I've been trained to do is to teach 18th century British literature, which I love, but I'm also a wanderer by spirit, and I spent 10 years writing a book on pain. And during that period, there was all kinds of environmental ferment going on that I had to sort of put blinders on to get the pain book written. And once I'd written that book, I knew that my next step was to write something about the environment. And I discovered Paul Watson's ship down in Key West. He wasn't there, but I got onto his ship. The Greenpeace ships were there in Key West. They were brightly colored. They were doing, they had tours on the ships. And there was one side of the docking area was this awful, ugly, black-looking converted cod trawlers, Sea Shepherd, and kind of obvious which one I would be attracted to. So I ended up going out on a mission with Paul Watson. I was told you couldn't find him, that there were lots of people who were so upset with his activism that he was regularly threatened with death. But I found him, and I said, I'd really like one of these days, I'd like to come on a trip with you. And he said, well, we're leaving in 2 weeks. Can you meet us on the West Coast? So I arranged to go out on a mission with Paul. And my understanding is that, in fact, Greenpeace had thrown him out as he was too aggressive. And he makes the term that while he isn't, there is no violence toward humans in what he does, that he's aggressive, and that a certain aggression is necessary. It doesn't necessarily turn into violence. In Buddhism, there are these wonderfully aggressive spirits or demons who are protective. And what I gathered from this, I guess it's my defense of Paul Watson against anyone who has legitimate questions about him, is that his stance is that he is going to protect nature. He's not some use the metaphor of stewardship. Some even make it sort of a managerial relation about sustainability. Paul's approach is direct action to protect the natural world. And he does that in ways that some consider aggressive, but he just sent an email newsletter around saying that this year no whales will be killed by Icelandic ships. So he says he's been on that mission since 1986, and finally it's possible to say whaling in Iceland is over. He now has Norway and Japan and Denmark to convince, but I think he'll do it. He's very persuasive, very persistent, and he's managed to create an extremely effective organization. So it's more than one person shaking his fist. It's a very charismatic, intelligent individual whose life mission is to protect the natural world. And I like that version rather than stewards of nature, which implies that sort of we're in an anthropomorphic situation where nature is out there and we're in here and we're the stewards. I like protectors. That our job is to protect. And if we protect it, then it might be there for the next generation. If we don't protect it, it may evaporate.
Yes, thank you. And I understand that, and I think when we chatted about this, you sort of suggested that, on a personal basis, you start off thinking, who is this guy? And towards the end, you're kind of having to take your hat off to him. Is that what it was like?
Well, when I wrote the book called Earth Warrior about the mission that I went on with Paul Watson in the North Pacific, the figure I had in mind, in the back of my mind, was the Great Gatsby. Watson has that quality, has that kind of charisma, has that bigger, larger than life reality to him. And he's got the kinds of, if you want to say quirks or flaws or however you want to say it, aspects of personality that, characterized Gatsby too. He wasn't he wasn't a Boy Scout. And I sort of pitched myself on that trip in the Nick Carraway figure of the sort of everyman who goes along with Gatsby to get a sense of what he's about. But Nick Carraway too. I can't quite remember how The Great Gatsby ends, but Nick says something like he's worth the whole lot. And that's kind of my feeling about Paul. He's worth the whole lot.
Thank you. There's a comment from Andrea in the chat who says that she loved hearing about the history and the courageous vision behind creating Central Park, and that the aerial photographs of the park were magnificent. Thank you for that, Andrea. And I don't know if anyone would like to pose any questions, because I mean, we could also talk about pain, or indeed the idea of wondering. But because I think that you obviously have written 3 books about pain, and that's something that does strike most of us at some stage throughout our lives. On the subject of wondering, I share your view of being a wanderer. I'm certainly not that sort of like straight path person. Offer me a narrow trail, and
yeah.
I'm off it.
Interestingly, in the academic world, you were very quickly encouraged to specialize. And in some ways, I think that's probably far more than just the academic world. It encourages us to narrow, to specialize, to be so good at something that we've cornered the market in whatever it is. And wandering for me is both something I do and also a kind of metaphor for casting the net wide. In addition to questions, I like comments, to which I could simply say, Sometimes people tie themselves in knots when they really wanted to ask a question, when what they really want to do is make a comment. And so this is a chance to make a comment too.
Yes. Anne, and then Mike. Anne, and then Mike.
Great.
Yeah, so this is absolutely delightful. I have a comment and a question.
Great.
So my comment is that my husband and I are in the process of attempting to purchase a large plot of land which when looking at all those photos of Central Park, the land we're trying to purchase is 440 feet wide by half a mile long. And so it's almost the same dimensions. I mean,
yes,
it's not, it's much smaller, but it's rectangular like that. And it was just fascinating to look at it and to think about some of the hiking paths. It's mostly wooded, about 3 acres is not. And as a second part of the comment, the question that we have gotten from some people, because of the way the land is and because of where the creek runs through it and because of the water, the only, this makes me laugh, but the only usable space is the front 3 acres. So there are 23 acres that to some people are useless.
right.
And I'm like, no, that's the point. Like the point of us buying this is to protect the land and the people who live there, the people being the deer and the fox and maybe coyote and raccoon and possum and birds and insects and all of those people. And for it's just a really interesting way to think about that our thinking is so specific that everything has to be usable. And my response has become, actually, the land is incredibly usable by humans because it provides clean water. It provides the oxygen that we breathe. It provides, like that land is actually doing a lot for humans.
Absolutely.
We don't actually think about. So those are my comments. My question, I have become more and more interested in the concept of systemic violence and whole systems everything, which I'm finally sort of maybe beginning to understand a bit more. So structural nonviolence and systemic nonviolence, are they the same thing? And it appears to me, when I start thinking about all of these things, our system is set up very specifically to encourage violence all over the way our roads are constructed, the way our food is created and delivered, the way our healthcare is done, the way our employment is done. Like, it appears that almost everything leans toward violence is very acceptable in a whole bunch of ways. And so is systemic violence, systemic nonviolence, structural, are those the same things, or am I misunderstanding?
No, I think you're right on, and I love your plan for the acres you've got. Perfect. And yes, I would use those two terms interchangeably. The structure, for me at least, it suggests something created. It's there. It may not. Maybe it stretches out to be a system. I don't know. But systems and structures are both creations. What's created can be uncreated or undone. And I just think, yes, I mean, we're not going to be able to erase all the structural violence that exists, at least in one generation. But, can we create some structures of nonviolence? And that really became, for Olmsted, what the park was. It was a structure of nonviolence. He didn't have a police force. He called them keepers, but they were uniformed. There were rules. One of the rules was don't throw stones at the birds. So it was not an unregulated space. I think you need regulation probably to have a structure. But it was structured to be nonviolent. And I like that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Mike.
You mentioned the international peace parks. Rotary International, I believe, set up several international peace parks in the United States, if I'm not wrong. I think one goes across from Glacier National into Canada. That was one. And there was another one between Texas and Mexico. But where with these administrations in government, they discourage those international peace parks, which I don't understand. We tried to put another one in between Tijuana and San Diego, and they'd rather build a border fence there than put in an international peace park.
Well, interesting. Yeah.
What are your? I think that there's difficulty politically now, stirred up by administrative activity that blocks those peace parks. Is that your understanding of? Do you know about those peace parks?
I do not know about those in particular, and I've come to that part of this journey rather late. I mean, my focus was on Central Park, and then discovering, in fact, that Mandela and the Peace Park Foundation have been there and are doing a different kind of work. The politics are there. The politics were there in New York City as well. At some point, you just have to keep at it until there's the change of mind that will promote the park. But there were times when New York City, the city had lost funding, and the park was brutalized in the process. So maybe what we need to do is get take it out specifically in the hands of politicians, because they seem able to ruin a lot of what they put their hands on.
So I think we need to pursue that peace park concept.
I do too.
Move it forward. I think that's between these nations with conflict. There's another situation over there between North and South Korea where the wildlife in the DMZ zone is probably one of the most prolific areas of wildlife in the world because humans don't go into that zone.
Well, that would be one of the big advantages of these peace parks. And I just like the concept as well. That the park is not just a place for recreation, not just for humans to enjoy themselves or take their RVs or their AT all-terrain vehicles, but that they're places that are dedicated to peace. The climate change crisis is never going to be adequately dealt with until nations, stop warring with each other with increasingly high-tech explosives that do nothing but degrade the environment. And in fact, as soon as you add nuclear to the question, it becomes apocalyptic. So I think just the issue of peace and parks needs to be united and work for ways of bringing private groups and public enterprises together, because they probably need each other.
My other thing, my other comment and maybe question is, you looked at Paul Watson and what he's done to move things forward, and then you look back when Theodore Roosevelt set up the National Wildlife Refuges and the National Park System in the United States, and John Muir and Roosevelt did agree on that, but they did disagree that Gifford Pinchot would step in and set up the Forest Service, which has destroyed a lot of the forests of the United States. So you had Pinchot and Roosevelt on one side, and Roosevelt and John Muir on the other side, trying to protect rather than use conservation and destroy.
If you got people involved, you're going to have conflict. And I guess that's was part of the reason behind my slide, putting up there Edgar Villay and Andrew Green. In fact, Olmsted dealt with so much conflict that by 1861, he was exhausted. The Civil War broke out in 1861. He had been in a carriage accident, a horse and carriage, that nearly killed him, left him lame for the rest of his life. Lincoln tapped him to run what was then the newly created United States Sanitary Commission. And for the next 2 years, he ran a commission that oversaw military hospitals and battlefield hygiene. And then he left that to run a gold mining company in California. So he was moving further and further away from Central Park until Calvert Vaux wrote him a letter and said, would you like to come back and help me in Brooklyn with this new Prospect Park Foundation? They did the delicate dance, but finally Vaux got him back to New York City and put him on the path that led him to become the patriarch of American landscaping. But the conflict is always going to be there. It's, I think, going to be how we handle the conflict, not how we avoid it.
Yes, thank you. There's wise words there. I think it is about how we handle it rather than how we avoid it. I was just a sort of a resonance between what you've presented for us here and when Ralph Acampora was speaking to us about matters of attention, and we were talking about attending to the more than human world, and he used parks as a really important example for places where the human world and the more than human world comes together in a sort of very synergistic fashion. So, and for a lot of people, that is, it's urban parks that are, especially if it's, by 2050, 68% of global population living in urban areas, that parks are sort of important places for that reminder that we are sort of one of the animals, that we are part of nature, and places where we can, we can be in this sort of, like he calls it, a sort of a bodily conviviality with other species. So parks also have that crossover area between, our human world and the more than human world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Amen.
If nobody else has any questions, then I'm aware that we've taken up a little bit of extra of your time, David, and I hope you didn't mind about that. But if you have any sort of final comments or anything that you'd like to sort of point us towards before I hand over to Olivia for the goodbye, then now's your chance.
Okay, it's to come back to the notion of protectors. In whatever way we can, even if it's a comparatively small sliver compared to Central Park, if we're protecting, we're doing the right thing. And I think that's the metaphor that attracts me these days, that we're not stewards of nature, we're protectors of it.
I like that.
We leave a legacy for the next generation.
Thank you.
Thanks to all. It's a pleasure for me to get to speak to you, and I'm very happy.
Thank you. So I'll hand back to Olivia, who can sign us off, and I offer you my profound thanks for your time and for your wisdom.
Thank you so much, David and Izzy. That was excellent. I learned so much, as everyone's saying in the comments. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's been just fantastic to be here with all of you on this very special July gathering. Our next Living One speaker will not be joining us until August 22nd, so we have a little over a month until then, during which time you're welcome to join us at our other gathering, weekly gathering, Vital Breath for Earth, which is 12 p.m. Pacific time every Wednesday. Registration for our next series of Living One is officially open, as is registration for the companion course for anyone who would like to engage the material of the upcoming series more deeply. So you can register and enroll on our website, krulos.org, or if you keep an eye on your email, we will send you updates and links with how to do that as well in the coming weeks. Once again, everybody, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, David, for coming on and sharing all of your wisdom with us. It's been amazing. And we hope you guys have a very good and safe rest of your day and month, and we'll see you soon.